Excuse me, Mr. DJ.
Hey, check this out. We got a great show coming your way.
From the ECSI Sports Studios, it's the Midday Market Report with Jeff Dawson.
Good afternoon, sports fans from all around the globe. I am your host, Jeff Dawson, East Coast Sports Investors, and this is our weekly trip to LA out west with a good friend and colleague, Mr. Ron at Ron A Sports, talking some college and NFL football. What we saw last weekend to what we see tomorrow and Sunday. With none other than Mr. Ron, who has decades and decades and decades of work and data. A good friend, and I'm smiling because, he understands what all the work is about and what the grind is all about and what it takes to succeed in these lanes, what it takes to have a casino or a sports book very nicely say, we love you. We really do. But please carry on and take your services elsewhere because we no longer want to take your action or we'll limit you to a number that is not even worth your while. But we won't call those places out. So it's been a great day at ECSI. Shout out to Mr. Sean Childs as we did our weekly fantasy show. Shout out to the boys, Matt Grissom and Q Millie as 3 Men in the Box returned, talking some college football. And, of course, right now with myself and Ron. Shout out to the boys behind the glass, Mr. Joseph Shea. And hopefully Evan is back there with him on hands training and getting himself ready for ESPN, Fox, or whatever calls after this. So without further ado, let's bring him in, the star of this show, the one and only Mr. Ron.
Good afternoon,
Ron.
Jeffrey. Well, you must have been eavesdropping on one of my calls because about 15 minutes before we got on, I had called a sports book to talk to them about why I had been suddenly limited after all these years. And they said, "Oh, we apologize, Mr. Ron, but that's our final decision." And this is where I'm at. So now we're up to 3 limits and we haven't even started week 1 of the NFL. So welcome to the world.
As I told you backstage, I co-host on Thursday nights with Anthony Pepe on Sports Map Radio, as he likes to say, 97 stations, including Hawaii. And a lot of guests from all around the country. We had Jeffrey Benson on yesterday from Circa Sports, and he explained his process. And he's got his sharp players that are allowed 2 to 3 dimes, 15-20 minute window. Get in, get out, get in, get out. And of course, once you're out, you come back in. The numbers change by 2 or 3 points, but he allows them to dictate the market. He is in the business to accept bets, not to limit people and say, we're all set.
That's the model, the business model that true sports handicappers and true people who understand the business of sports handicapping, that's the preferred model. It's not the model of, we don't care about sports, we're going to limit those people who win. We're not going to take their action, even if it's small. They raise their limits during the week on purpose because they want to get a sense as to where some of the sharp players are going, where the numbers should center in on. But other models, they just want this to be part of their sports book, part of their casino, whatever the case may be, so that it's not a loss for them, but they're just going to clone everybody else. And that's just where we are now in the regulated market and in the unregulated market. So I'll deal with it. I'll still write these previews that I have. We finished all 32 NFL previews. I've got my weekly sheets. They're all ready to go. They were updated this afternoon as far as what the odds are, what my writing is, what my plays are going to be. I'm proceeding as it's business as usual because football is my time of season.
Well, no more raining on URI's parade. Last weekend, dust has settled. Some big time upsets. I think Baylor was 28-point favorites. They lose outright. Obviously, we will get to Colorado, 20.5-point underdogs, win at TCU. There was a couple other head scratchers. I want to start with this one, Ron. They were only 12.5, 13-point favorites, and that was Clemson at Duke. Now, never in my 45 years of sports betting, 1975 was my first wager, have I ever seen this. And maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong. I've never seen a team start first and goal from the 1, first and goal from the 7, and first and goal from the 1 and not score 1 point. Have you ever seen anything like that?
I think I've seen 2, but I haven't seen 3. So that's pretty hard to do. Not sure if they would have won anyway, because I like the mobile quarterback of Duke. Certainly the line, you could tell early on, was not going to hit the way it was. But yeah, that they hurt themselves a lot. And I think part of it is maybe the new coordinators, their second year coordinators, maybe they missed the guys that left for other schools.
I'm going to give a shout out to Mr. Connor here. Welcome, Connor. Hopefully you're having a great weekend. Shout out to Russell as well. Shotgun from the 1 is a big problem for me. Yeah, me too. And the funny thing is, I didn't even have Clemson minus 13, 12.5, 12, 11. I had their team total over 34. And literally, I still dumbfounded. I won't even talk about the 2 missed field goals or anything like that. It was comical for sure. People are talking about Dabo. He's done 0 since no Deshaun Watson, since no Trevor Lawrence. I think you talked about this last week, Ron. Maybe we can add on to it. I think the transfer portal, the nil money, has evened the playing field, especially for some of these coaches and teams we wanted to anoint that maybe just aren't where we thought they really were.
It's interesting because the transfer portal, and especially the money, changed the dynamics of how hard it is to be a non-Power 5 team and keep your best players. All those schools, and even some of the schools that are in the same conference, SEC, Pac-12, and so on, if you're not a school with a lot of money, you tend to lose some of these players who are just going after the money. But the unanticipated result is that if you don't participate at all in the transfer portal, and that's what Clemson has done, you now fall behind. And a lot of the storylines from some of the writers and some of the handicappers after the Clemson Duke game was how far behind Clemson has come because the transfer portal is not something that they've embraced. I think we're going to see that change after this year because, boy, has that changed football and changed the way teams are assembled faster than ever before.
It was funny. I was getting texts and people were saying, I don't know what I'm watching. The faster and more physical team was Duke. It wasn't Clemson.
Yeah, excellent. I said this when Mike Echo, he took the job at Duke. I said, wow, this guy could have held out for a better job. Well, maybe Duke is a better job the way that he's assembling the roster because he's a really good coach and he's going to get some offers other places. I wonder if he just wants to set his foot down and stay right there, but they got themselves a real good hire.
All right, let's go to Boulder. I talked about Jeffrey Benson. I talked about Circa Sports. They opened up their number of Colorado -5. Their sharps came in and bet it down to 4-3 and even to 2. That's Nebraska grabbing the Nebraska points. Settled into 3.5. Nebraska offensively challenged opening week against Minnesota. Had the game won, lost it late. Obviously, we know the story of Colorado, 20.5-point underdogs. Deion's son, 38 for 47 for 4 touchdowns, 510 yards passing. Travis Hunter, Mr. Deion himself, defense and offense. Thoughts on the Buffs? Thoughts on that game in Boulder on Saturday?
We talked about this last week, anticipating that Colorado's offense was going to be better than people anticipated. And it was even better than that. I can't name a game where 4 different players at the highest level of college football playing against the runner-up in the national championship gave up 100 yards receiving to 4 different players. Just incredible. But we also talked about the fact that I thought Colorado's defense was going to be worse than people thought. And that's true as well. It's going to be hard to set a true power number on Colorado. In fact, it's getting harder to set true power numbers right off the bat when you see so many portal changes. 80 plus in Colorado, 50 plus in Arizona State, so on and so forth. I can't trust my number right now. I'm going to have to let it go for about 4 weeks. I thought 5 was a little rich. On the other hand, Nebraska is kind of finding its footing again. They find different ways to lose. The way to beat Colorado is just to control the line of scrimmage. I think you can bully them at the line of scrimmage. I think Nebraska has a good enough ground and pound game that they could control some of the clock in this particular game. The problem Nebraska has is that Colorado's scheme seems to be ahead of the curve. As much of an entertainer as Deion Sanders is, I think he's also a good schemer, and he also understands talent, and he seems to be so far a pretty good judge of talent. They've got to avoid injuries. This is not a deep roster in terms of their starting 22, and I'm going to worry about their defense all year long. Everybody's getting on the Colorado bandwagon. I'm not there yet. Offensively, I'm there, but defensively, this is going to be an interesting test at the line of scrimmage. I understand opening it higher because all the money was going to come in on Colorado at a certain point. If you're talking 3, 2.5, I think they're going to get more Colorado money line money on this game. But I'm staying away from it, and I'm just going to learn about it.
Before we jump to the NFL, Ron, I got to ask you your thoughts. The rematch at Tuscaloosa this time, Alabama and Texas, a game that most people think that Texas should have won last year. I think if I remember correctly, Alabama was probably a 16-point favorite. It was a big number, and lucky to get the win. They did not cover. Mr. Ewers comes back as the starting quarterback. Mr. Sarkisian's best team probably he's had. Against an Alabama team that we've been waiting for the last couple of years, an Alabama team that we know is sick and tired of hearing about Kirby Smart in Georgia. A night game at Tuscaloosa. The place is going to be rocking. The number is settled at 7. Initial thoughts on that game?
Yeah, I think the number is correct. I think Texas is the better team. I think Alabama loves flying under the radar. I think Alabama's defense is going to be really interesting. What Sarkisian does well, and there's a few things he doesn't do well, but one thing he does do well is offense. And Ewers had a kind of a rocky start to his career. He was young. He had transferred. Who knows? He's settled in, and he looks like he's going to be a pretty good quarterback and maybe one of 20 or so pro-ready quarterbacks. This is going to be a crazy year for quarterbacks as far as drafting in the NFL. It'll be interesting to see what he does against this Alabama defense. Strength of Alabama this year, I know their wide receivers are older. Strength of Alabama, I think, is going to be defense. It's kind of unheralded right now. Strength of Texas is going to be offense. They've got a lot of great recruits. They have a lot of money to throw around. I think it's going to be a barn burner of a game. It wouldn't surprise me if Texas hung in there. It wouldn't surprise me if Texas won and if they were too good. But something tells me it's not going to happen. It's another stay away game for me, but it's an intriguing matchup.
Before we jump ship to the NFL, I want to ask you quickly. Tonight, Illinois travels to Kansas. My opening number was 4 with a 54. Currently at Circa, it's still 4. Looks like a possible 3.5 there next move, and under over of 57. Any initial thoughts on that, Ron?
Illinois is kind of in rebuilding mood a little bit. They had such a good year and their defense was incredible last year, but a few of them went to the NFL. Their defensive coordinator also left, and we saw some growing pains right away. They also missed Chase Brown, their running back. They really couldn't get as much traction that way. I think Illinois is going to grow as the season wears along. What I'm curious about of Kansas is whether or not that defense starts to improve. We know the offense is built really nicely. Daniels comes back. That's probably why the line is more than 3. I would have set it offhand at about 2.5. So we're right around where the line is. I'm a little more impressed with what Kansas did week 1 than Illinois. The over-under is pretty high. I don't know if I can trust Kansas's defense, but I probably would lean to the under because we're talking about a pretty high number. And I think both teams would rather just get first down after first down. And I don't think we're looking at stretching the field unless we're talking about a Daniels 50-yard run, which is certainly possible, or somebody on Illinois exposing Kansas's run defense. But I think you're going to see a chunk of running in this particular game. I would lean toward the under. I'm really curious as to who's going to win. I think it's going to be a good game to watch.
Switch over to the NFL. Game 1 officially in the books. A Kansas City loss at home, which we don't say very often. No Travis Kelce. A number that opened at 7 that closed around 4.5, and the total as low as 52 at the Circa last night. We tongue-in-cheek backstage talked about Kadarius Toney and single-handedly with the drops and then the tip pass, which was the pick 6. Didn't have the best games. It was next man up. I thought Justin Watson looked okay. Rashee Rice looked okay. Pacheco, yeah, okay. On the Detroit side, in my eyes, the best guy, both sides of the ball, it wasn't even up for debate, was Mr. Hutchinson. He was in Mahomes' face most of the game there, disrupting him there. St. Brown was St. Brown, but they steal the win. I was more curious on Andy Reid's approach to 2 4th and 2s, where they came out and kicked field goals instead of trying to get it first down, especially that second field goal where the 3 points that they got still didn't make it a 2-possession game. So you've had, 12 hours to digest and think about it. What was your thoughts about last night's game?
Play calling on both sides had me shaking my head. I understand analytics. I understand when to go for it and when not to. I know it's a new game offensively minded, but it looks like these guys took a step back. Really concerned about that. 1 sack total in the game. You mentioned pressures, and Hutchinson certainly provided that and so on. But 1 sack was predictable because you're talking about 2 of the top 5 offensive lines in the NFL. So I was okay with that. I think my impression of Kansas City is that they miss Travis Kelce a lot more than they miss Chris Jones in this particular game. I think the wide receiver unit is pretty good. You mentioned Rashee Rice. I think he's going to be a really good receiver in this league. I was surprised Richie James didn't get more touches because he's one of those short to medium guys who could get open in 7 to 10 yard slots and then maybe stretch the field a little bit. So I was a little surprised at his usage. There's so many wide receivers on Kansas City, but there's no rhythm right now. We knew that the running back Pacheco was not going to be at 100%. He wasn't in the offseason. He had 1 carry in preseason. So this was all about Mahomes, who tried to do as much as he could, was their leading runner. On Detroit's side, maybe they stole a win. It wasn't their best game, but I saw some people down on Detroit. I think a win is a win, and Detroit can only move forward and be better because of this. The secondary looked pretty good when you consider that Mahomes was the opponent. I endorse completely the running back carries that they had. Everybody wanted Gibbs to have more carries as a rookie. This is a 17-game season. This is just game one. Gibbs will get his carries. They used him. They got his feet wet. I like what Detroit did offensively. This is not a great wide receiver unit. You have St. Brown and a bunch of other guys. And Goff's confidence is pretty high right now. He's bonding with his offensive coordinator. My takeaway is Kansas City's going to find their wide receivers down the road, but they need Chris Jones for other teams, and they need Kelsey. And Detroit's going to be just fine. Good win by Detroit. Kansas City with their treacherous schedule down the road. This is going to be scary for Kansas City fans.
And lastly, on that game, I was also impressed with the rookie Laporta for Detroit at tight end. I thought he complemented Goff very well. Sure, he had a very physical tight end player.
Yeah, information is key in the NFL. One of my two prop losses were that Laporta was going to go under his 31.5 yards because he was going to split time. Well, he did split some time, but then after that, his sure-handedness caused him to get 2 or 3 more grabs in the second half and beat me. Laporta's going to be pretty good in this league. Iowa tight ends have a way of underachieving in the NFL. I mean, underachieving in NCAA because Kirk Ferentz is like a dinosaur in offensive plays. But then they get to the NFL, and these guys are pretty good.
I agree 100% there. Okay, opening kickoff this weekend in the NFL. There's a bunch of games. For the Circa contest, I think there's 3 train wrecks. We always get at least one train wreck in the Survivor. Just off of the top of my head, Seattle is only a 5 or 6 point favorite against the Rams. No cup. Preseason, they just look horrendous there. Washington, 6.5 point favorites against Arizona, a quarterback that was just brought over. No disrespect to Mr. Dobbs, but again, don't know really how much he has offensively ready for the game. Never mind the Arizona defense. And then, of course, the Ravens, 9.5, 10-point favorites against Houston. Is there a chance that one of those 3 could actually win the game outright, Ron?
Well, there's always a chance, they say, but when you play a team matters. I'd much rather play the Rams with Seattle week 1. I'd much rather that Seattle, if I were Pete Carroll, have this week 1 game than after the Rams have had some time to play their guys and Cooper Kupp gets healthy and so on. The Rams traditionally just do not get ready to play week 1. So unfortunately for the Rams, it's a tough situation for them. You didn't mention a game. I want to compare and contrast 2 games: Minnesota, Tampa Bay, where the line's been around 5, and Washington, Arizona, where the line was 6 and moved up to 7. The difference in those 2 games to me is that Washington has more of a shutdown defense, and Minnesota, even though they're supposed to be much better than Tampa Bay, does not have a shutdown defense. So by that token, I'd say Washington should win. It's a really indictment of Washington if they can't beat Arizona. But Minnesota, with almost the same spread, I wouldn't be surprised if they had problems because they don't have the shutdown D. And I like some of what Houston's done, but putting C.J. Stroud into the mix against a Baltimore defense is probably a recipe for disaster. I wouldn't endorse anybody of those 3 in week 1, but we've seen strange things happen in week 1, and somebody pulls an upset and then they end up losing 9 in a row. But offhand, I guess of the 3, I would say the Rams.
And I like where your eyes are with the Bucks. Good wide receiving core. Obviously, Baker Mayfield, the big question mark there, and how well their defense will also play. The Vikings 2 years ago led the NFL with the worst record in one score possession games. Last year, they led the NFL with the best record in one possession games. So I like where your eyes are there. Two more games. Tennessee plus 3.5 at the Saints, I think is a tricky number there. And then locally, about 45 minutes away from me, seems like some money's coming in on the Patriots. It's down to 4. I've seen some 3.5s. Obviously, Bill versus the NFC champs, Super Bowl runner-up, potential hangover, yada, yada, yada. What do you make of those two games?
Both of those have technical factors that have me liking a side in each of those games. Tennessee, I mentioned this, Chris and Ted and I, we did our Friday show. We got back on the Friday show at noon, and I mentioned it because this is one of Sports USA's games, and that's what Ted covers. And Tennessee at the beginning of the spring looked like they were purging veterans. And then by the end of the summer, they've got DeAndre Hopkins, they've got Tannehill starting, they've got Henry starting. Anytime you can get the hook on a team again, with New Orleans, who generally is not a great favorite. They have a defensive-minded coach. They play it close to the vest. I'd rather be on Tennessee for technical reasons, not necessarily for metric reasons. But the 3.5 looks pretty good to me in terms of where I would go. Only way I would look. Same thing with New England, Philly. Now, we've all heard a lot about Super Bowl teams that if they lost the Super Bowl the next time out, first game back, they're not that good. The Rams tanked pretty badly against Buffalo for a million reasons last year. That was very evident. This one's not as evident. 6 wins, 21 losses against the spread in terms of Super Bowl losers coming back the next year. So offhand, you'd say, okay, maybe you take New England, but Philly's a very complete team. The roster has been built differently than others because Howie Roseman really knows his stuff. He gets Cunningham. He fills the run lanes that way. He lost a lot of starters, offensive line, and a lot of defensive guys. But that's going to happen with the salary cap because Philly pays their guys very well. Reason I like this game for New England, especially when the number was 5.5, is not just for that factor, but it's because New England generally does a lot of work with its players on special teams where they have an advantage in this game, and with a lot of personnel. And they tend to play, they don't always win week 1, but they tend to play games close week 1 because they've got a battle plan. They know how to slow down a defense. Two things about New England that bother me: their lack of speed overall with their best players, and the fact that they're playing a mobile quarterback in Jalen Hurts, and sometimes that's hurt them. But on the other hand, I think the more assignment sound week 1 team is going to be New England. I'd rather make a case for New England staying within the number. I think it's going to be a close game.
If I gave you the Saturday card in college and the NFL card on Sunday to enhance our viewers and listeners, maybe to a couple numbers that you think were off a little compared to your numbers. And of course, I know this from working with you the last couple of years, is the fact that the first month is just data. It's eye tests, it's watching the games, it's gathering data for after the first 4 weeks. But are there anything Saturday or Sunday that has caught your eyes or piqued your interest?
Yeah. Week 2 is always interested in college because you get a lot of line movements right away. Because I'm so busy in the NFL, what I mainly do week 2, I think I may have mentioned it to you last week, is that I look at 9 to 12 games that I think there's going to be big line movement. Take this if this is, take this and whatever. And I don't always follow what I say because I was disappointed in about 4 of the lines, and I still would have had 3 or 4 points of value if I just did it. But I just didn't like where the line came out at Circa, for example. But they're sharp, so they knew what to do, and then it went even further. So I missed some of those. But let's talk about a couple of the games. Miami of Florida and A&M. Everybody loves what A&M did last week, and that's good because they really weren't as bad. I knew last year was going to be a learning experience for them. I was really down on them preseason last year, and they delivered. I think they're going to be better this coming year, and I think they're going to be really good next year when these guys become upperclassmen. They did a good job. The problem is people, again, seem to be sleeping on Miami of Florida, who tends to have good Septembers and then falls by the wayside. They always win the transfer portal. They win the recruiting wars. They field this good team. I was impressed with what they did as well week one. And I think the line is higher than it should be. Let's just put it that way. I think this is a toss-up game. I think the money line is interesting for Miami, taking nothing away against A&M. But I think Miami has as good a talent in their starting 22 as A&M. And we'll find out next week. That line seems to be off. And I'm going to be really curious about another game. It's under the radar game because that's what I deal with. I want to give you an under the radar game. I don't want to give the listeners all Texas, Oklahoma. But let's talk about UCF and Boise State. UCF looked unbelievable last week. I cannot remember offhand who they played. It wasn't a particularly great team, I think. Did they play Kent State? Was that the 56-6 game? And Kent State is actually one of the 3 worst teams in football. So if that's the opponent they played, yeah, they ran for 300 yards, but did we learn anything about Kent State? Meanwhile, Boise got boat raced by your team, Washington. Washington looked really, really, I mean, that offense and that scheme, what he's brought in 1 year and 1 game has been amazing. So my question about Boise is, are they that bad, or did they just run into an unbelievable offense in Washington? Because I think Boise has a quarterback with some, he's not as accurate as I'd like him to be. He's still a sophomore. Last year was his true freshman year. He didn't even start at the beginning of the year. His name is Green. But he's a dynamic runner, and I think he could keep UCF off balance. Again, I think we're talking about a toss-up game unless you really believe that UCF is that good and maybe Boise is that bad. At least for me right now, there's a little bit of line value on Boise. I'm just curious to see whether UCF is that good and whether we have to worry about Boise's defense. And we'll find out for sure after this week's game.
And do you have one game in the NFL, or do you think it was the Patriots that if you had one in the NFL to tell the listeners?
Well, I will tell you the game that, let's see, which one do I want to give you? I think I'm going to give you the game that, if this is the line I use, you put 100 people on an island, 99 will be standing on one side and I'll be standing on the other. So I'm against 99 people. But I think, again, when a game plays matters. And even though I think Green Bay is a better team than Chicago, and even though I think Green Bay will end up with more season wins than Chicago, this is a situation where Chicago is focused. Green Bay is way too young at wide receiver, and one of their guys maybe even 2 of their guys may not play. Way too young at wide receiver, way too young at tight end. We don't know about Bakhtiari, whether or not he's at full strength to start the season. Rashawn Gary on the defensive line is going to be on a pitch count because he's coming back from an injury. I know the roster isn't perfect for Chicago. I know Rodgers isn't there, but Chicago is tired of hearing about Green Bay being Green Bay. And as I said, if this was a week 5 or 6 game and Chicago is already 1-3 or 1-4, then who cares? But Chicago is 0-0. They're honed in on this game. They get Green Bay when all their youngsters are still they're raw. They're babies. Most of them, no, I won't say most of them. Some of them would have to be carded in bars to find out if they could be served a drink, the wide receivers and the tight ends. This is the best shot Chicago's going to have. They got their pass rusher about 3 or 4 weeks ago to help put some pressure on Jordan Love in his first start. That's meaningful. Again, Chicago's not better than Green Bay, but maybe they are week 1.
Watson has been ruled out, by the way, and Dubs is questionable still. And of course, the funny thing, I heard nothing about Watson all week, and then he was fine through training camp, fine through preseason. and then it was during this week that something popped. So they're hoping it's week to week. So it was a blow to a few of my fantasy football teams. So, uh, but as we always end here, especially with you, the stage is yours, is what we like to say, closing thoughts, where you can end the show any way you would like, sir.
Well, one thing I learned week one in college football, besides my distaste for all the commercials and the continuity, is that anybody who tells me that fatigue is going to be a factor in a college football game that's on NBC or CBS or Fox or any of these stations that paid big money for all this realignment, I think they're fooling themselves. I'm going to give you an example. There was a West Coast game, San Jose State and Oregon State played in, there was no humidity at all. San Jose State went, I think they ran 5 or 6 plays, then they punted. Then we had 7 commercials. Then we came back and Oregon State, put together a drive. Oregon State was doing a fine job. I mean, their game plan was, talking about game planning, Jonathan Smith had them going. After the 6th or 7th play and they got into the red zone, I heard the announcers say, you could see the fatigue on San Jose State's defenders. Nothing could be further from the truth. It was an offensive line that was better than the other team's defensive line. How could you be fatigued when you've had 5 minutes of commercials, literally 5.5 minutes of commercials, and the other team has run 7 plays without any humidity? So taking aside the comment there, I think we're going to find games are disjointed in college. At least that's what I'm going to think. I don't think you're going to have the typical Army, Navy, Air Force wear down of another team when a game is on TV and you've got all these sponsors and so on and so forth. I think you're going to have players that if they only run, let's say you got a quarterback, you got a young quarterback, and he's thrown 2 or 3 passes in the first 7-8 minutes of the game. So he hasn't gotten a rhythm yet, the way we're used to Tom Brady getting into that second quarter, third quarter, fourth quarter rhythm. And then you've got all these commercials. That guy may never get into a rhythm. I think you're going to be looking at games. That's why I think you're going to see some unders occasionally and some turnovers occasionally. But you really shouldn't see defensive fatigue in a college game unless you're in a heavy humidity and a game that somehow doesn't take a commercial break after a change of possession. I really learned that about the college game. And I think it could be applied to sports handicapping in in-game situations and so on. I just don't think fatigue is going to be a factor in these games.
Have you noticed the clock of, a lot of people, experts, so-called experts, and we know the non-experts, with the clock, after first downs not being stopped, that it's just going to be an under machine. What I've noticed is exactly what you just talked about, and especially in the fourth quarter, you talk about rhythm, and then when one team scores, another team scores, you can see that pace going. The start and stop, the 5-minute commercial breaks. I'm going back probably 10 days now, maybe almost 2 weeks. The UConn NC State game where it was like watching paint dry in the fourth quarter, and there was no rhythm. There was no nothing, and it had nothing to do with the running clock, Ron. I guess that's my point.
Yeah. 2 thoughts about that. One is I saw inconsistency with how people ran the clock. Some people forgot to run the clock when they went out of bounds. I saw some games where there was quite a delay, 7-8 seconds before they ran the clock. They stopped it and then they ran it again. So some of the stadiums, some of the people, they're getting used to running it. You want to watch paint dry, this coming week. My wife doesn't sweep that many hours in a day. She just have trouble sweeping. I'm going to have her watch the Iowa State game. That's going to put her to sleep within 12 minutes. Talking about pace of play and stuff like that. That's going to do it. But the odds makers adjusted. There were more overs than unders, and I think we hinted at that last week. When you have games where the spread's double digits, so let's say 15 points or more, even a Wyoming Texas Tech game, you think Wyoming, well, they're not a dynamic offensive team, but you had a double digit spread. You actually had a spread that was completely off We didn't talk about that, and I'm not wearing my Wyoming hat, but I really should. When you have those kinds of spreads, a lot of those games went over. But when you have those North Carolina State games, when you have some of these games where the lines were 3, 3.5, 4, and they're feeling each other out, or the Northwestern Rutgers, where pace of play is already going to be really, really slow, you're going to see unders in certain games and overs in certain other games. I really think there's going to be two categories. And I'm hoping that odds makers are not going to be listening to your show right now, because I don't want them to catch on to the fact that overs on some games are going to be a little bit more predictable in my eyes, and unders on some games are going to be a little more predictable. But make no mistake, the odds makers are adjusting already, and that's why we already have had, in general, more overs than unders. But again, we had more overs than unders because we have a lot of non-traditional games, a lot of cupcake games, a lot of teams just building up their resume before conference play. When we get to conference play, I wonder if we're going to see a little bit more unders.
I agree. Well, that will be something that we will obviously address as the season progresses. If you're not following them, please go over to Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it this week, and go to Ron A Sports. Follow him. He does follow you back. He's an amazing follow. His work is second to none. Go find out exactly what decades and decades of information can prove to you, not just to read, not just to follow, but at the sports book. So please do that. Been a great day to everyone watching and listening. Shout out to Mr. Bill, to Connor. Thank you guys so much for watching. Everyone here, please enjoy the day and the weekend. Invest. Have a few skin in the game, as we like to say. Busy weekend ahead on Saturday, and of course, the first full week of the NFL on Sunday. From myself, Jeff Dawson at EC Sports Invest, from the one, the only Mr. Ron at Ron A Sports, we wish everyone a blessed day, a great weekend, and we'll see you next week.